క్లాసు ఎక్కడెక్కున్నావు? కర్నూలేనా? పిల్లోడు బాగున్నాడా లేదా? అదే నారాయణ కాలేజ్ కదా.
So this is what actually we have discussed in the last. So this is the example to perform the CRUD operations using REST API. So from here we need to continue today. Let's continue our discussion. Here in the last session, see, we have discussed how to define exception handler, and the same thing I have even included in the document. I'll share this document today with you. Okay. This is what actually yesterday's example, and this is the link to download this. And these are the input validation statements which I have given. And this is what actually we have written in the code, just I kept it here. Now, back to the point. See, there is a single controller class here, which is a REST controller class. Correct. This is a REST controller class. Okay. But suppose if you assume that you have multiple REST controller classes. Now this is an exception handler you have defined within a single REST controller class. REST controller classes.
Recording in progress.
మూడు కరెక్ట్ చెప్పాలి. 6 రోజులు పాస్ నేను ఇప్పుడు 9 అట్లాంటి అట్లా అని అన్నారు. 36 అని అట్లా 5 చెప్తాను. 1 గంటల 2 గంటల 3 2 2 4 3 వస్తాం ఇది క్లాస్ విని కొంచెం ప్రాక్టీస్ చేస్తాం. సరే
ఉంటే ముందు
ఈడే తినరాళ్ళు కదా, ఈడే తినరాళ్ళు. క్లాస్ నువ్వు క్లాస్ చేస్తే రాదు. బోర్ బంద్ చేయదు.
అవా మళ్ళీ వస్తానులే కదా వచ్చినట్టు.
Recording in progress.
And the other one is at the method level. And like this, you can define the global exception handler class, and you can able to handle the exceptions globally from multiple REST controller classes. Now, what we will do, we will also modify our code. Instead of defining a local exception handler like this, now we will keep this in comment. Now we will go ahead and we will global exception handler class, and we are going to define a REST controller advice, and also we are going to define the exception handler method. Correct? We are going to see these things next. In our example, we are going to implement global exception handler class with REST controller advice and exception handler annotations. Same thing. Next, we can define custom exceptions also. In REST controller, we can define custom exceptions and we can throw if exception occurs. Okay, see. These are the things that we are going to implement. Next, we will understand about how to throw the custom exception from the REST controller class. Okay, see, for example, you want to update an employee by ID, but the employee does not exist with this ID. What are you returning? You are simply returning HTTP status code bad request. Right? Bad request is some kind of error HTTP status code. Bad request, not found, these kind of things. Okay, right? Try to understand what I am saying here, okay? You are only returning the HTTP error response or HTTP status code which is related to error. Right? Good. But now you also want to, okay, you also instead of returning just HTTP status code, you can throw the exception also from your REST controller. Okay, right? If you throw the exception, it is an indication that what this REST controller is unable to handle the request. Then the exception handler will deal with it. Instead of returning just HTTP error state score, like bad request or not found, something like that. Instead of returning bad request or instead of returning not found, what can you do? You can throw the exception. That is another way. And you can define one exception handler, correct? And in that exception handler, you can just create a response, and that error response is going to contain not only the status code, you can also write some kind of meaningful message and you can return it back, okay, to the client. So here in each and every REST controller class you are writing this type of you're constructing a response entity to throw the HTTP error response. Instead of that, you throw the exception. You can also throw the exception from REST controller, and you can define a global exception handler, and that exception handler will deal with that exception and it will return error response to the client. This is another way, and comparatively returning error response will have more details when compared with just returning bad request. In this case, if there is no employee with this ID, then you can throw an exception here, or even you can throw an exception here. Okay, and now you can define exception handler for it. That exception handler will construct some error response. That error response contains detailed information. I mean, we can put the detailed information about the error, and that could be sent like a response to the client, and that is a better option when compared with just returning error HTTP status codes. So these two things we will implement into this current example. So then we will again test this application. Okay, we will again test this application, and before we do that, we need to make some changes. First one is what we want to define: global exception handler. Global exception handler means what? Instead of writing exception handler in every REST controller class manually, you can also define it globally, so that the global exception handler is executed when exception is thrown or when a validation errors occur in multiple REST controller classes of the application. That is called global exception handler, and that is what we are now going to discuss. Right? We are going to look into that. Along with that, we also want to throw some exception, because we want to know that how we can create an exception and how we can throw it and how we can handle it. These are the two things that we are going to implement into the current example. So let's start implementing this into the current example. Okay. First, I am going to create let's say one new package, and I call it as advice. Some package I am creating, like a package name I am creating in.ashokit.app.advice, or it could be some name. It could be some name, that is up to you. Okay, right? I'm just creating one package called advice, because we want to create a global exception handler. Okay, let's do that. create a new Java class. Yeah. So some class that we can create. Class name can be any, okay, any class name. Let's say, for example, employee, or it is a global exception handler. Some name, it doesn't matter what name that you have written for this global exception handler. Now, at a class level, okay, I want to use annotation called REST controller advice. This is annotation to be used at class level. Next, already yesterday we have created one exception handler method here. So let's copy this code first. Just instead of writing it locally, we are defining in global another class, and this class is annotated with REST controller advice. Now let's keep this into comment. This code into comments. Now we have created a global exception handler. Next, this is one. What is the other thing that I told? Instead of simply returning manually, instead of manually returning error HTTP status code like bad request or not found like that, you can throw a custom exception. And let's create a custom exception, and if that exception occurs, correct? If that exception occurs, okay, so then we want to return, we want to handle that exception. Okay, by defining an exception handler, we can handle that, and we can construct some object which contains more details, at what time, for which request URI, okay, with some exception message and status code. We can return detailed information about the exception. More information can be sent to the client by defining exception handler instead of just returning status code 400, 404. Instead of doing just only sending that, we want to return detailed information, and for that we need to define one exception handler. First, what we have to do is you create one more package and to define exception. Create an exception here. Let's say resource not found exception. You are creating one simple Java class, and let's say extends runtime exception. These are all 4 skills that you have already know. You know already how to create a custom exception in Java. You know there are multiple predefined exception built-in classes are there, starting from arithmetic exception, and you have, and the most popular one like null pointer exception, okay, array index out of bounds exception, SQL exception, file not found exception, class not found exception. So many multiple exceptions classes, you know, you are aware of it, okay. And apart from that, you know already how to define user defined exception class. If you want to define user defined exception class, then you have to extend your class from another class called what? Runtime exception. And here we should define one constructor, public resource not found exception of string message, and call the base class constructor. Okay, this is, I no need to explain this. This is from your core level that you know this is called parameterized constructor. This is a parameterized constructor, right? And you know super call, and the super call is to call the constructor in parent class. Okay, and you are just passing this error message to parent class constructor. Parent class will keep this message in a message variable, and whenever default message variable, whenever we call get message method, we just get the message of the exception. So to access the message of the exception, the message is passed from our class to its parent class, and we are creating runtime exception. It is unchecked exception. Okay, this is one exception class I have created with the name resource not found exception. Now let's go back to REST controller and let's see from where and where we can throw it. Suppose if employee is null, which means what, with this ID there is no employee, means resource not found. Here I am sending just response HTTP status code is not found, error status code, but I do not want to send just like that. I also want to send some detailed information about this. So then throw the exception and define exception handler to return some detailed response. So first I will like to throw the exception here, not return. Throw the exception. Throw new found exception with the message employee not found with ID. Then I would like to pass ID. A resource not found exception. Got it? With a message employee not found with ID, and just append the ID of the input. This is one place. Coming to here also. Right. If for example any validation error occur, I'm trying to say, but maybe unique constraint is violated or not null constraint is violated, some exception will be thrown. If the same email is already exists for one more employee, then database constraint violation exception will occur. So if any exception occurs during save operation, then it is okay. Right. So I can just throw resource not found exception with some error message, but generally resource not found exception is specifically for when this ID does not exist. But here exception occurs not when ID does not exist, if any other constraint violates, because save method can perform insert or update operations. It will insert or it will update also. If the ID already exists, it will update. If ID does not exist, it will insert. It's not an ID issue. So what do I just want to, I do not want to change this particular statement because it is not belongs to resource not found exception. This is a resource not found exception because first we are trying to find an employee with ID, but there is no employee with this ID, then resource not found. So instead of return, Row, new, resource not found exception with error message. Again, the same error message. Employee not found with this ID. Employee not found with ID from employee object. Employee dot get empno. Even for patch update also the same exception. Row, new, resource not found exception. And the same message. Employee not found with ID. And let's go with the delete operation. Throw, new, resource not found exception with the message employee not found with ID. Correct? Okay, we are throwing it good. Exception name is resource not found exception. But where could I handle this? I can write exception handler locally, or I can also define the exception handler method in a global class. So now in this global exception handler class, I can define another exception handler method that to handle resource not found exception. We can define a separate exception handler class for each exception. Okay, otherwise you can write a single exception handler to handle all the exceptions. That is not a good way. You know, for example, I am writing exception handler with the parameter exception dot class. Now this exception handler is going to become a single exception handler for every exception, for all exceptions. But I do not want to define such kind of exception handler, right? Okay. Since it is a parent class for every class in Java, exception dot class. Ours is resource not found exception dot class. Okay, resource not found exception dot class. Okay, public. I want return response entity, not map. Already map is there on the top for the previous method. This time I want is response entity. Response entity of, let's say, error response. Okay. There is a predefined class called error response, but we do not want to use that. We want to use our own error response class. I need to create that class. Okay. You can see there is one interface called error response. It is from Spring Framework Web, but I do not want this interface. I want to create my own error response class, which is a custom class. It's not yet created. I will create that. Okay, but not this error response. Good. I'll tell you that. I'm going to create one new class called error response. Handle resource not found exception. One method I am creating. Handle resource not found exception. And the parameter of this exception, parameter of this method is whenever you define any exception handler method, the method parameter should be the exception class. The first parameter of the method should be exception class. So resource not found exception. But before I continue, I would like to create one new class called error response. It is one Java class, okay? It is just like a Pojo class or something like a model class. Okay. And what is my intention? I want to create one error response object, and to this object I would like to keep the HTTP status code and error message and the timestamp information. Timestamp indicates like at what time, okay, date and time of the exception, and what is the URI that you actually accessed it. What is the request URI? What is the request URI for this exception? So this information I want to keep into one object, and this object I am calling it as error response object. Means I should create one class error response with these fields. And I will like to set the data while handling this exception. I want to create an object of this error response class, and I would like to keep, I want to set the data of status, message, timestamp and URI. Then I would like to return to the client this as a response. The error response object should be sent to the client. Of course, it will be sent like a JSON data format. Correct? Okay. Then what should I do? First, I should create one class called what? Error response class. I am going to create this class first. These are the fields I need. In that, one field is to set the status code, and other one is to set the error message. Timestamp of the error means that date and time of the exception, and then what is the request URI of this exception. Okay, this class is just a simple Java class, which means it is a Pojo class, or we can call it as a model class. Okay. So what I do, I just want to create one more package. That's better. Model. Let's create a new Java class. Error response. Some class, actually any class name of your choice. Since we are sending the response for an error, that's why the class name is error response. Okay. Private string, or first let's say int status code. Private string error message. Next, private timestamp, instant timestamp. Next one is instant is a class, and the request URI. These are the fields I want to have, and to get the constructor, setter, getter, then we have Lombok. So we can add annotations like no args constructor, all args constructor, and getter, setter, otherwise simply data, get data from Lombok API. Okay, this is the class I have created. This class name can be any name. It's a user defined class, so name of the class depends on you, but I have created the class as error response. Now I should go to my global exception handler, right? Now I have to import this error response. So there is an interface from Spring Framework, and another one is a class created error response. It's a C class and it is from our model package. So we need this class, not this interface. So this selection is required. Error response selection is needed. So you have to select the error response. Here, first I would like to construct the error response object. It's a class. We need to construct it. Okay. Error response equals to new error response. We have all args constructor also, and we have setter getter methods also. That's up to you. So I am using setter methods. So error response dot set status code. HTTP status dot I can say not found dot value or bad request dot value, both are okay. HTTP status dot bad request dot value, otherwise not found dot value, anything. Not found means 404, bad request means 400. Okay, the requested resource is not available. If the requested resource is not available, okay, then generally it is called 404 not found. So you can say not found dot value or bad request dot value, both are okay, no issue. Next, error response dot set error message. Then exception object contains a method called get message. Right? You know that in exception handling of Java, you learned that we can access the details of the message, the detailed exception message by calling get message method. Exception class, exception message, and if you want to print back trace of the exception, then print stack trace. Okay, these are the different the knowledge gained in exception handling of Java. So set error message. Only I want that message, and I would like to set that message to this error response object. So call the get message method, which returns only that message of the exception, the description of the exception. Next, that message string is nothing but description. Next, error response dot set timestamp. It is instant dot now. Instant is a class from Java 8. Local date, local time, local date time, zoned date time, instant. Like this, we got some new date time API classes from Java 8. Okay, so this is the timestamp. Instant means it is not related to any specific time zone, because the client of this, for this REST API, the client may be from a different continent. a different time zone.
Sir, hello.
Then if I return error response with the date and time of IST, Indian time zone, and that doesn't match with my client, because my client who is calling this endpoints may be from a different time zone, not only from Indian time zone or IST time zone. That's why when you are returning any time, date or time, something like that from REST APIs, you should not return in a specific time zone. You should not return the value that is now at a particular time zone. Your value should be independent of all the time zones across the globe. That is called instant. Instant means it is some time on the global time zone. It is not related to any specific time zone of anywhere in the world. It doesn't belong to anything. It can be converted. This instant value can be converted to the required time zone. I can convert this value into IST time zone or PST time zone, EST time zone, CST time zone. Okay, any. Okay. So this is called instant. Instant means it represents a time on a global timeline. Global timeline doesn't belong to any zone or any time zone. It's global timeline. It represents a point or a time in global timeline. That's what instant. And if it is converted to Indian time zone, we will get right now whatever according to IST. If it is converted to, let's say, UK or US or Australia, their time zones, the same instant will return the date and time into their time zones, according to their time zone. It's called instant. Next. Next one is, I want to set the request URI also in their response. But request URI I can access through request object. Request object, it has a parameter. So let's take HTTP select request. You can see I'm taking second parameter HTTP select request because I need to access the request URI. You can see why I took that second parameter. You can see now. Request.get request URI. This method I want to call. In order to invoke this method, I need a request. That's why I took this as parameter. Spring while invoking or while executing this method, Spring will first identify who are the parameters and Spring will pass them. Don't worry on that. Okay. Spring will handle providing the required parameters to invoke this method. Now return the response entity with the body error response object, which contains this status code, error message, timestamp, and request URI with status code not found. In this error response object also we have the not found value that is in the body part of the body part of the response, and in the headers, in the status line also we are going to send the status code as not found. This not found goes to status line. Status line means already response message contains a status line, headers, body. Mainly 3 parts will be there, right? Okay. Okay. All right. So see the difference now. See the difference now. Now this is status line. Okay, this is status line. The status line contains the status code. Not found. Not found means 404. Within the body, there is a JSON response that also contains status code. The status code is 404. Here status code will be there. Here error message will be there. Timestamp will be there. Request URI will be there. All will be there in the error response. You'll get some error message here. Timestamp will be there. Request URI will be there. This is in the body part. This not found is in the head, in the status line. The response status line contains 404 not found. That is the error code and is a description. And the status line first part is protocol HTTP. The first line is called status line, as we have discussed already, request and response message formats. And then next followed by headers, next one body. So we know that response message, HTTP response message contains 3 parts. First one is status line, the second one is called headers, and third part is called body. 3 parts are there. Similarly, request message also. Request message contains request line, response message contains status line. Both contains headers and body parts. So I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Then the next step is I just need to start the server and just check whether the new changes are happening and the new changes are working or not. Means the global exception handler is working or not. Global exception handler can be defined with annotation REST controller advice. Okay, in my example currently I have only single REST controller class, but actually there can be multiple REST controller classes. If there are multiple REST controller classes in application, then instead of writing exception handlers in each REST controller separately or individually, you can define a global exception handler. And that exception handler can be created by using annotation at REST controller advice. So 2 things I have covered here. One is how to create a global exception handler. Second one is what I told about how to define a custom exception and how to throw it and how to handle it. Handling the custom exception. Okay. So now we can start the server and we can test it. We'll do that. Next, we'll see multiple 3-4 changes we will make, and then we will better to go with that application instead of doing one change and executing it. Right. Now, one more small change that we can say. This is actually application.properties file. But now we want to move from defining the properties files to defining an YAML file. just there are two options too. There are two options for us in either Spring MVC applications or even in Spring REST applications. In Spring Web MVC, okay, or in Spring REST. In Spring Web MVC or Spring REST API, we can define configuration settings in either application.properties file or application.yaml file. Either application.properties file or application.yaml file. Extension could be YAML or it could be YML. Both are correct. Okay. But from already we have discussed this, executed this application yesterday and we got the result. We have seen that. Means even in previous applications also we know about the properties file, but now we want to replace the properties file with YAML file and we want to continue from today only writing the YAML files, not the properties files. Okay. Means there are two options for us. One is you can maintain a properties file and you can define the configuration settings, or you can define YAML file and you can define the configuration settings. You have two options. One is properties file and second one is YAML file. Correct? One is a properties file, the other one is YAML file. That's your wish now. Okay? You can go with either properties file or you can go with the YAML file. That's up to you. Correct? Come back to the point. When compared with the properties file, the YAML file is more readable. And the YAML file is a format that is going to be accepted in working with the tools like Docker and Kubernetes. And the YAML file maintains the configuration settings in hierarchical order, hierarchical structure with indentations. So it becomes more readable. There is a hierarchy with indentation. It maintains the configuration settings in hierarchy with indentation. So that's why prefer YAML file rather than properties file. Okay, so by writing YAML file configuration, first thing is it is more readable because the properties are in hierarchical order. Okay, and it's easy to manage when in future if you are adding more configuration settings. It's simple and easy to manage when application configurations are growing. Okay, and file name you can keep either application.yml or YAML, anything is okay. Okay. And there may be other question. Can we add both files in application at resources folder at location src, both files, application.properties file and application.yml file? Okay, absolutely correct. We can do that. If both exist, both can coexist. If suppose both the files are exist, then first the configuration settings and after that the configuration settings will be loaded from the properties file. First will be from YAML and second will be from the properties. Both can coexist. Generally we don't do that, but both can exist. And suppose if both the files are having any matching property, Then first the property value loaded from YAML. After that the property value loaded from properties file. So which means the value that is coming from properties file will override the value that is loaded from YAML file. If any property matching is there, generally we don't keep both in the one application. We only define one of the two. But if in case both are defined, both can coexist. Application.yml file, application.properties file, both can coexist. Both can exist. They can coexist. Correct. Okay. So basically YAML file makes the configuration settings more readable and easily manageable because it maintains the properties in hierarchical order. Let's see how to write that. So we have properties file already, the same file, but let's see how to write into YAML format. So this application.properties file that we are writing in
వాట్లేదు వస్తుంది
YAML format. That's it.
తలపేసి వస్తుంది.
అయితే అప్పటి
Okay. Let's do that.
Right.
After writing the YAML file, I will delete the properties file. Right now, I just want to make the properties file exist because by looking at this properties file, we will try to see how to write the same property in YAML.
బాగా పడిందా పండు
పైన బాబడింది, కింద అసలు బాగుంది.
సగం కలమైంది
Now we are going to write one YAML file. So then we should choose new file and keep the file name as application.yml or YAML, anything, under resources folder. Yeah, this is a YAML file, application.yml. See the first property, spring.application.name. Spring is the parent property, application is a sub property. Okay, name is a sub property of application. Dot means it's a sub property. It is a sub property of application. Here also same thing. Spring is a parent property. Main sub property. Banner mode is a sub property. So the parent property and sub property are separated with a colon with indentation. Then into the next line, parent and sub are not in same line. So for example, spring.application.name, I can write like this: spring colon, no tab spaces. Don't use tabs. Tabs are invalid. Only white spaces. Indentation means two spaces. Exactly two spaces. Okay, the sub property comes in indentation line. Application colon.
పందైనట్లే నడవడం.
Again two spaces from application. Name colon space. Between colon and actual value there must be at least one white space. At least one white space. So there is a white space here between colon and its value. What's the value? Red rest. Okay.